The Young and the Restless spoilers. Thurdays full October 9, 2025. The morning began with quiet tension in Genoa City, the kind that hums beneath the surface of every conversation, where words carry double meanings and smiles hide resentment. At the Newman Ranch, the patriarch himself was already orchestrating his next move. Victor Newman had spent decades pulling strings, breaking alliances, and rebuilding them when it suited him. Yet, even he could sense that the world around him was shifting again. Nikki had arranged to meet Jill Abbott later that day, a meeting that promised both civility and danger, for those two women never shared coffee without hidden agendas. Jill had always walked the fine line between ally and adversary, especially when Victor's empire threatened to encroach on her business holdings. But for now, Victor had other matters on his mind, namely, Phyllis Summers. Phyllis had never been the kind of woman to back down. She thrived on confrontation, on challenging men who believed they could outwit her. That was exactly why Victor had invited her to breakfast. It wasn't an act of kindness, it was a test, a verbal duel disguised as small talk. When she arrived, sharp in her red suit and unapologetic smile, Victor wasted no time with pleasantries. He mentioned Kane Ashby, his tone laced with disdain. He said he'd heard rumors about her and Kane working closely, perhaps too closely. Then, leaning back, he asked her why she would align herself with the lowest of the low. Phyllis didn't flinch. She had been called worse by better men. She met his gaze and calmly explained that Kane had offered her something valuable: opportunity, purpose, and, more importantly, respect. She said she would give everything she had to the partnership because, unlike others, Kane treated her as an equal. Victor smirked slightly, that familiar look that said he was 2 steps ahead. Phyllis knew it too, and before he could press further, she cut him off. She accused him of inviting her there not for conversation but for intelligence, a corporate interrogation disguised as a meal. She reminded him that she wasn't one of his subordinates and that he couldn't manipulate her into revealing Kane's plans. Her tone was fiery, almost daring him to push her harder. Victor raised an eyebrow but didn't rise to the bait. He merely observed her, quietly amused by her defiance. Phyllis leaned closer, her voice low and laced with conviction, saying that she and Kane were strong, stronger than anyone gave them credit for, and that together they would climb to the top. She declared that no one in Genoa City respected her, but that didn't matter anymore because she had already made her move. And when she played to win. Victor's expression shifted slightly, half admiration, half warning. He finally stood, saying in his deep, measured tone that she and Kane truly were a perfect match, two predators convinced they were untouchable. As he turned to leave, he nearly collided with Nick Newman walking into the restaurant. Father and son exchanged a wordless look, the kind that carried years of unspoken tension. Victor told Nick not to leave town just yet, his voice low but firm, hinting at unfinished business. Then he was gone, leaving behind the echo of his dominance and the faint scent of espresso. Nick approached Phyllis cautiously. Their history was long, tangled, and still smoldering beneath the ashes. He slid into the seat beside her, his tone softer but edged with concern. He told her he hoped she wasn't finding satisfaction in the chaos Kane was stirring up, chaos that was now threatening to spill into Newman Enterprises' orbit. Phyllis smiled wryly, swirling her coffee before answering. She told him she didn't understand why Victor was so angry about what Kane was doing when Victor himself had done far worse to far more people over the years. Her words hung between them, a blend of truth and provocation. Meanwhile, across town, Nikki was preparing for her meeting with Jill Abbott. Nikki's reflection in the mirror was poised but cold, her mind running through every possible outcome of the encounter. She knew Jill wasn't meeting her just for idle talk, there was always a motive. Jill was dangerous when cornered, and Nikki suspected that behind her polished charm, Jill had something explosive to reveal, perhaps even connected to Victor's recent moves against Chancellor Winters. Still, Nikki was ready. She had weathered wars that would have broken lesser women, and Jill Abbott was just another storm to face head-on. In contrast to the corporate power plays, another emotional storm brewed quietly as familiar faces prepared to return home. Tessa Porter and Daniel Romalotti were on their way back from their trip, a journey meant to heal old wounds and rediscover their creative passions. Their return promised new beginnings but also the reopening of old scars. Genoa City had changed while they were gone, and neither realized how much chaos awaited them upon arrival. Daniel, haunted by mistakes and unfinished business, would soon find himself pulled into the same vortex of ambition and betrayal that defined his family. Tessa, ever the dreamer, would be forced to confront how fame, distance, and loyalty could crumble under pressure. Back at the club, Phyllis finished her coffee, her thoughts racing. She could feel the room watching her, they always did. Every time she walked into a public space, whispers followed. She was used to being the town's pariah, the woman who always crossed the line, who schemed and survived in equal measure. But this time felt different. This time, she wasn't just surviving. She was building something with Kane, something that could shake the entire hierarchy of Genoa City. She smiled to herself, not out of happiness but out of determination. Nick sighed, shaking his head. He knew that look in her eyes. It was the same look she'd worn countless times before, right before everything went up in flames. He wanted to stop her, to warn her, but he also knew better. Phyllis Summers was unstoppable when she set her mind on something. She thrived on being underestimated, on proving her worth through rebellion. When she finally rose to leave, she turned to Nick with a mix of pity and challenge. She told him that Victor's empire was cracking, and that maybe, just maybe, the town needed a new kind of ruler, one who wasn't afraid to break the rules. Then she walked away, heels clicking like a countdown to the next disaster. Nick remained seated, staring into the distance. He had seen this story before, alliances born out of pride, ambition, and desperation. And every time, it ended the same way, with hearts broken and reputations burned. Across town, Nikki arrived at the Grand Phoenix, where Jill was already waiting. Two legends of Genoa City sat face to face, each one wearing a mask of polite civility. Beneath the smiles, however, both were calculating, waiting for the other to make the first move. Whatever words passed between them that afternoon would ripple through every family and business in town. By the end of the day, Genoa City would once again find itself divided, Newman versus Abbott, truth versus manipulation, loyalty versus greed. And in the middle of it all stood Phyllis Summers, defiant as ever, proving that no matter how many times she fell, she would always rise again, sharper, stronger, and more dangerous than before. The Newman Ranch had never been a place for light-hearted visits. Every conversation that took place within those walls carried history, regret, and the kind of tension that could only exist between people who had survived too much together. On that gray afternoon, Jill Abbott arrived at Nikki Newman's invitation, uncertain of what awaited her. The two women had shared decades of rivalry, reconciliation, and mutual respect, all shaped by the ghosts of their pasts, especially one ghost neither could fully let go of, Catherine Chancellor. As Jill stepped into the grand living room, she was met by the familiar scent of aged leather and the quiet hum of the fireplace. Nikki stood by the window, her posture elegant but weary. She turned when Jill entered, her expression softening just enough to suggest that this was not a meeting of business, but of emotion. Nikki began slowly, as though testing her own voice. She said there was something she had been meaning to express for a long time, something that had lingered in her heart but had never been spoken. "I just want to thank the Chancellor family," she said quietly. "What Catherine built, what she gave to Genoa City, it still means a great deal to me." Jill's face softened, a rare vulnerability flickering behind her sharp exterior. She nodded and said that Catherine would have wanted to hear that. The memory of Catherine still hovered over them both, not just as a figure of power, but as a complicated friend, rival, and mother figure whose shadow loomed large over every decision they made. Nikki hesitated before asking the question that had been pressing on her mind. "Do you ever regret selling the company?" she asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and compassion. Jill didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands, fingers clasped tightly together, then sighed deeply. I regret a lot of things, she finally admitted. But not because of the company. I regret ruining my relationship with my son. I made him feel exactly the way Catherine made me feel, not good enough, not worthy of trust or love. I became what I hated. The words hung in the air like smoke. Nikki, moved by the rare honesty, stepped closer. Her eyes softened as she said quietly, "She loved you very much, Jill. More than she ever admitted." Jill smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with restrained tears. For once, there was no rivalry between them, no power game, just two women who had lived long enough to understand that pride could destroy far more than it protected. Then, almost as if to change the tone, Jill mentioned something that had touched her deeply, the letter Nikki had sent after Chance Chancellor's death. It had been kind, sincere, and unexpectedly comforting. Jill thanked her for it, saying that it had meant more than she could ever express. For a moment, both women were silent, remembering the young man whose loss had left a wound that still hadn't healed. Jill finally broke the silence, saying perhaps it was time she left. But Nikki stopped her. She had one more topic to discuss, one that had been troubling her for weeks, Kane Ashby. Nikki confessed that she had heard troubling whispers about Kane's new alliances and his unpredictable behavior. She wanted to know what Jill planned to do about it. Jill's expression changed immediately. Her defenses went up, but not out of guilt, out of loyalty. She insisted that Kane was a good man, that he had made mistakes but was trying to do better. She wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, something that Catherine herself had often refused to do with those she loved. "People can change," Jill said firmly. "Kane deserves that chance." Nikki, however, wasn't convinced. Her voice grew firmer, sharper, as she replied that this wasn't just about one man's redemption, it was about the entire town's stability. "It's not just Jack and Victor who are worried about what Kane is planning," she said. "Everyone is. Whatever he's doing, it's creating ripples, and we can't afford to let that spiral out of control. You have influence, Jill. You might be the only person who can stop him, whether you want to or not. You could be our last hope." Jill listened, torn between loyalty and logic. She wanted to believe that Kane's intentions were pure, that he wasn't slipping back into his old habits of deception and ambition without conscience. Yet, deep down, she knew how quickly power could corrupt, how easy it was for good men to become pawns in their own greed. Still, she wasn't ready to abandon him. "He's trying," she murmured softly, as if to convince herself as much as Nikki. "He's really trying." Just then, Victor entered the room. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere. The air seemed to tighten, the weight of his authority filling every corner. He greeted Jill with that calm, commanding tone that always carried an undercurrent of dominance. Nikki turned toward him and explained that Jill was willing to place her faith in Kane, to believe that he still had good in him. Victor's reaction was instantaneous. He shook his head, his expression cold and certain. "She'll change her mind," he said flatly. There was no malice in his tone, only conviction. He had seen too much, trusted too many, and been betrayed enough to recognize when someone was walking into danger. Nikki looked between the two of them, her concern deepening. She knew her husband well enough to understand that when Victor Newman made up his mind, there was no changing it. If he believed Kane Ashby posed a threat to his business, to his family, or to Genoa City itself, then Victor would act. And when Victor acted, someone always paid the price. Jill met his gaze without flinching. She was no stranger to powerful men or their threats. "Maybe you're wrong this time," she said quietly. "Maybe Kane really has changed." Victor's silence was more telling than any response. He simply looked at her for a long moment, his eyes calculating, then turned to Nikki and said in a voice that sent a chill through the room, "We'll see." After he left, the two women remained in the quiet aftermath of his words. Jill took a deep breath, steadying herself. She knew Victor's warning wasn't just talk, it was a promise. And though she wanted to believe Kane was innocent, part of her feared that Victor was right. As she gathered her things to leave, Nikki walked her to the door. There was a fragile sense of understanding between them, two women who knew that, in Genoa City, every alliance came with a price. Outside, the afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the ranch. Jill paused before getting into her car, glancing back at the grand house that had witnessed so many battles, so many secrets. She wondered how long it would be before the next one erupted. Inside, Nikki stood alone by the window, her reflection merging with the landscape beyond. She had hoped this meeting would bring clarity, but it had only deepened her unease. Somewhere out there, Kane Ashby was making moves that could either redeem him or destroy them all. And if Victor's instincts were right, if Kane's ambitions were as dangerous as they feared, then Jill's loyalty might soon cost her everything. It was a quiet morning at Crimson Lights, the kind that carried the illusion of peace before everything unraveled. The soft hum of the espresso machine filled the air, mingling with the smell of coffee and cinnamon. Sharon tried to focus on the routine, wiping tables, refilling mugs, checking inventory, anything to keep her mind from drifting to the worries that had been haunting her lately. When Esther Valentine walked in, cheerful as ever, her presence brought a brief warmth to the cafe. Esther had always been one of those steady, comforting figures in Genoa City, loyal, dependable, always ready to help even when the world seemed to be falling apart. Esther smiled brightly as she approached the counter, handing Sharon a folder. "Don't you worry about a thing," she said, her voice full of certainty. "I've got everything under control here while you and Nick are in London visiting your son." Her optimism was almost contagious. For a moment, Sharon allowed herself to believe that everything might truly be fine. She thanked Esther softly, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and exhaustion. Then Esther, always bustling with purpose, disappeared into the back room to take care of some deliveries, humming under her breath. But the calm didn't last long. The bell above the door chimed again, and when Sharon looked up, she saw Tessa Porter and Daniel Romalotti walking in. Their expressions were heavy, their steps hesitant, not the faces of people returning with good news. Sharon immediately felt the air in the room shift. She could sense it before they even spoke. Something was wrong. "Did you find anything about Mariah?" Sharon asked quietly, bracing herself. Tessa glanced at Daniel before answering, her tone trembling slightly. "We did," she said finally, "but you're not going to like what we have to tell you." She took a deep breath, as if rehearsing the words in her mind before letting them out. "We went to the hotel where Mariah was staying," she began. "We spoke to the bartender who was there the night she got drunk." Daniel took over, his voice steady but grim. "The bartender remembered her clearly," he said. "He told us that while she was sitting at the bar, a man approached her. They talked for a while, and then, they left together." He paused, watching Sharon's expression shift from worry to disbelief. "They were close, very close," Daniel continued. "He said they were intimate. They left the bar together that night." Sharon's hand froze around the coffee cup she'd been holding. The sound of her heartbeat seemed louder than the ticking of the clock on the wall. "I was afraid of this," she whispered. "I knew something like that would happen." Her voice broke slightly, the pain of a mother caught between fear and denial. But Tessa wasn't finished. She looked at Sharon with sorrow in her eyes and said softly, "It's worse than that." Sharon's breath caught. "Worse?" she repeated, almost in disbelief. Tessa nodded. "We got a name from the bartender. The man's name is Will Hensley. He left the hotel in the middle of the night, in a hurry, looking terrified. The bartender said he was shaking." Daniel added, "He looked like someone running from something. The guy was scared out of his mind." There was a silence so thick it felt like the air itself had turned to glass. Sharon tried to process what she was hearing. "What are you saying?" she asked slowly. Tessa's voice softened, her next words almost a whisper. "Sharon, your daughter confessed something. She told someone she almost killed a man. We think it might have been Will Hensley." The words hit Sharon like a physical blow. Her hand trembled as she set down the coffee cup, her mind racing through every conversation, every moment when she had sensed Mariah's growing instability but dismissed it as stress. "No," she said under her breath, shaking her head. Mariah wouldn't, she couldn't. Daniel exchanged a worried glance with Tessa, then said carefully, "Maybe she didn't mean to. Maybe he tried to hurt her, and she fought back." The bartender said the guy seemed scared before he disappeared, maybe she was defending herself. Sharon tried to cling to that explanation, to make it fit. "Yes," she said quickly, her voice trembling but hopeful. "Maybe he tried to take advantage of her, and she fought back. That must be it." But the look in Tessa's eyes told her the situation was far more complicated. Tessa hesitated before speaking again. "There's more, Sharon." The bartender described Will Hensley, his age, his build, his mannerisms. He said he was about the same age as Ian Ward, maybe a little younger. Same height, same physique. Sharon's expression darkened instantly. The color drained from her face, her eyes wide with disbelief and dread. Ian Ward. The name alone was enough to twist her stomach into knots. He was a monster from her past. A manipulative, dangerous man who had once tried to destroy her and everything she loved. The idea that someone resembling him had crossed paths with her daughter sent a chill through her entire body.